The descent began just after dawn. 3 figures stood at the edge of Eagle Nest Sinkhole in Florida, their silhouettes stark against the grey morning light. The water below was still, dark, and deceptively inviting. It was known among divers as the Mount Everest of cave diving, beautiful but ruthless. Daniel, the most experienced of the trio, double-checked the gear one last time. His quiet, methodical nature had kept him alive in places that swallowed others whole. Elise, a skilled navigator and researcher, was adjusting the wrist-mounted dive computer, murmuring calculations under her breath. Nathan, the youngest but no less prepared, took a deep breath, steadying himself before the plunge. One by one, they slipped beneath the surface. The world turned silent except for the rhythmic hiss of their regulators. As they descended, the blue daylight faded into shadows. At 30 meters, they passed the warning sign. Stop! Prevent your death. Go no further. A grim reminder of how many had never returned. They pressed onward. At 60 meters, the tunnel opened into the main cavern. Their lights cut through the darkness, illuminating rock formations that had never seen sunlight. A fine layer of silt covered the floor, undisturbed for centuries. Elise gestured, signaling the next direction. They followed the planned route, careful, deliberate. At this depth, any mistake could be fatal. Time slowed in the abyss, their movements cautious and precise. It was at 90 meters that they saw it, a fissure in the rock face partially obscured by shadow. It hadn't been on any map. Daniel motioned for a closer look. Elise hesitated, then nodded. Nathan hovered near the entrance, peering into the unknown. What lay beyond was darkness, an untouched passage seemingly untouched by human presence. The pressure pressed against their suits. A silent question passed between them. Do we go in? None of them were reckless. None of them were foolish. But the urge to explore, to document, to uncover something lost to time was undeniable. After a long pause, Daniel signaled. They would proceed, but carefully. They swam forward, their flashlights cutting through the thick, liquid blackness. The walls around them narrowed, the tunnel constricting as if it were a living thing exhaling. The silence here was oppressive, heavier than in the known chambers. The only sounds were the hum of their regulators and the occasional soft scrape of a fin against the stone. They moved slowly, conscious of every breath, of every motion that could disturb the delicate equilibrium of their environment. The tunnel twisted and turned, revealing strange, jagged formations, the walls smoothed by eons of water flow. Elise checked her depth gauge, 102 meters. They were beyond the known boundaries now. Then the passage widened, revealing an air pocket above. They surfaced cautiously, heads breaking into the unknown chamber. Their headlamps illuminated massive walls adorned with bizarre, unnatural markings, ancient symbols that seemed neither natural nor human-made. Nathan exhaled sharply. What the hell is this? Elise pulled herself onto a ledge, scanning the markings with wide eyes. I don't know, but this shouldn't be here. Daniel remained in the water, eyes narrowed. We document and get out. This place feels wrong. Then, a sound. Subtle at first, a low hum resonating from the walls themselves. The water beneath them rippled as if something far below had stirred. Nathan turned his head sharply, scanning the darkness. A shape moved, a flicker of motion against the shadows, and then nothing. Nathan clenched his jaw. I saw something, down there. Elise looked at Daniel, concern flickering across her features. Could be an illusion, low light, water distortion, but we should stay alert. Daniel nodded. Let's be quick. Take photos and samples, then we head back. They began documenting their surroundings. Elise traced the carvings, snapping pictures. Nathan took notes on the formations. Daniel checked their air levels. The tension in the chamber was suffocating, each second stretching unbearably long. Then a whisper, a distinct sound like a breath against stone. Elise froze. Did you hear that? Nathan nodded slowly, fingers tightening around his camera. The whisper came again, more pronounced. It was not the sound of water shifting or rock settling. It was a voice. Daniel swept his flashlight across the cavern, its beam cutting into the darkness. The light caught something not quite right. A shadow that did not move with the beam. It remained still, unmoving, watching. A sudden gust of air rushed through the chamber, though there was no discernible source. The hum in the walls intensified, vibrating through the rock. Nathan stumbled back, his breathing ragged. "We need to go, now." Elise hesitated, still staring at the symbols. "But we haven't..." The whisper turned into a chorus. Low, guttural voices overlapping, speaking in no language they understood. The markings on the walls seemed to shift, the carved lines twisting, rearranging into something unreadable. Daniel grabbed Elise's arm. "No more discussion. We're leaving." They turned for the water. But the surface was no longer calm. Ripples danced, forming concentric circles, as if something were rising beneath them. Then a hand broke the surface. It was long, pale, with fingers too thin and stretched, bones pressing against wet, translucent skin. The nails were jagged, uneven, as if they had been scraped against stone for years. Slowly another hand emerged, gripping the ledge. A figure rose from the water. It was humanoid. The proportions were slightly off, unsettling. Its limbs were too long, its shoulders hunched, as if it had been forced into spaces far too small for its frame. Its face was obscured in darkness, save for two gleaming white eyes that held no emotion, just pure, unrelenting horror, as if it were screaming in silence. The creature did not attack, it did not move toward them. Instead, it crouched on the ledge, its head tilting unnaturally, its unblinking eyes fixed on the group, watching, studying. Daniel, Elise, and Nathan stood frozen, unable to breathe, unable to move. The air in the chamber felt heavier, as if the oxygen itself recoiled from this thing's presence. Nathan turned his head slightly, glancing back at the water, at the tunnel they had come through. It was gone. The entrance, the only way out, had vanished. Panic surged through them. Elise grabbed Daniel's arm, her breath ragged. "Where's the exit?" It was right there. Nathan took a shaky step back, eyes darting between the empty water and the creature. "What do we do? What do we do?" The creature remained still, only its breathing, shallow, irregular, audible in the suffocating silence. Then, after an eternity, it smiled. The smile was wrong. It stretched too wide, the corners of its mouth splitting unnaturally, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. The sound that followed was a guttural, wet chuckle, reverberating through the chamber and echoing off the walls. It was a sound that didn't belong to anything human, or anything that had ever been human. Daniel's training kicked in. He grabbed Elise and Nathan, pulling them back toward the wall. "Stay close, don't look at it, don't engage." But the creature didn't move. It simply crouched there, its head tilting further, its eyes never leaving them. The air grew colder, the hum in the walls intensifying, vibrating through their bones. The markings on the walls seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, reacting to the creature's presence. Elise's voice trembled. "What is it? What does it want?" "I don't know," Daniel whispered, his grip tightening on his dive knife. "But we're not sticking around to find out." Nathan's eyes darted around the chamber, searching for an exit. "The tunnel's gone. How do we get out of here?" Daniel's mind raced. They were trapped in an air pocket, surrounded by water with no visible way out. The creature was between them and the water, and even if they could get past it, the tunnel they'd come through had vanished. He glanced at Elise. "The markings, do they mean anything? Could they be a map?" Elise shook her head, her hands trembling as she held her flashlight. "I don't know. They're not like anything I've ever seen. They're shifting, changing. It's like they're alive." The creature's chuckle grew louder, more distorted. It shifted slightly, its long, bony fingers curling and uncurling against the stone ledge. Its eyes never blinked, never wavered. It was toying with them. Nathan's voice cracked. "We're going to die here." "No," Daniel said firmly. "We're not. We've been in worse situations. We just need to think." But the truth was, they hadn't been in worse situations. This was beyond anything they'd ever encountered. This wasn't a cave-in or equipment failure. This was something ancient, something malevolent, something that didn't belong in their world. The creature suddenly moved, its head snapping to the side with a sickening crack. It tilted its neck at an impossible angle, its gaze now fixed on Nathan. It began to crawl forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by an unseen hand. Nathan stumbled back, his breathing rapid. "It's coming for me. It's coming for me." Daniel stepped in front of him, holding his knife out. "Stay behind me." The creature paused, its head tilting again, as if amused by Daniel's defiance. Then, with a speed that defied logic, it lunged. Daniel swung the knife, but the creature was faster. It dodged effortlessly, its long fingers wrapping around his wrist with a grip like iron. The knife clattered to the ground as Daniel cried out in pain. The creature's touch was freezing, its skin like wet parchment against his own. Elise screamed, grabbing a rock from the ground and hurling it at the creature. It struck its shoulder, but the thing didn't flinch. It turned its head slowly, its grin widening as it released Daniel and began to crawl toward her. Nathan, paralyzed with fear, finally snapped into action. He grabbed Daniel's fallen knife and charged at the creature, slashing wildly. The blade connected, slicing through its thin, translucent skin. Black, viscous liquid oozed from the wound, but the creature didn't react. It simply turned its head to look at Nathan, its grin never faltering. Then, it spoke. The voice was a cacophony of whispers, overlapping and distorted, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. The words were unintelligible, but the tone was unmistakable, mocking, cruel, and filled with malice. Nathan dropped the knife, backing away. "What the hell is it saying?" Elise's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not speaking to us, it's speaking to something else." The chamber began to tremble, the hum in the walls growing deafening. The water below churned violently, bubbles rising to the surface as if something massive was stirring beneath them. The markings on the walls glowed faintly, their patterns shifting and rearranging into something even more alien. Daniel grabbed Elise and Nathan, pulling them toward the far wall. "We need to find another way out now." But there was no way out. The chamber was sealed, the walls closing in as the water rose. The creature continued to crawl toward them, its movements slow and deliberate, savoring their fear. The water surged upward, swallowing the ledge they stood on. The trio scrambled to higher ground, their movements frantic and uncoordinated. The creature followed, its grotesque form gliding effortlessly through the rising water. Its eyes glowed brighter, reflecting the faint light of their headlamps like twin moons in the abyss. Elise's voice was a desperate whisper. "The symbols. They're changing again, look." Daniel turned his head, his heart pounding as he saw the carvings on the walls shift and writhe, as if alive. The lines twisted into new patterns, forming a spiral that seemed to pull at his very soul. He felt a strange compulsion to touch them, to trace the lines with his fingers, but he resisted, shaking his head to clear the fog that threatened to overtake his mind. "Don't look at them," he shouted, grabbing Elise and Nathan by their shoulders. "It's messing with our heads." The creature let out a guttural laugh, its voice echoing through the chamber. It was closer now, its long fingers scraping against the stone as it dragged itself toward them. The water lapped at their feet, cold and unrelenting. Nathan's voice cracked. "We're trapped, there's no way out." Daniel's mind raced. He knew they couldn't fight the creature. It was too fast, too strong, too alien. Their only hope was to find another exit, something the creature hadn't anticipated. He scanned the chamber, his eyes landing on a narrow crevice in the far wall. It was barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was their only chance. "There," he shouted, pointing. "We go through there." Elise hesitated, her eyes darting between the crevice and the creature. "What if it's a dead end? What if we get stuck?" "We don't have a choice," Daniel snapped. "Move." They scrambled toward the crevice, the water rising faster now. The creature let out a screech, its voice a cacophony of distorted screams. It lunged forward, its long fingers clawing at the air as it tried to reach them. Nathan was the first to squeeze through the crevice, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Elise followed, her smaller frame allowing her to slip through with relative ease. Daniel was last, his broad shoulders scraping against the stone as he forced his way through. The creature's hand shot forward, its fingers brushing against his ankle. He kicked out, his boot connecting with something cold and slimy, and the creature let out a howl of rage. The crevice opened into a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough to crawl through. The air was thick and stale, the walls pressing in on all sides. Daniel could hear the creature behind them, its guttural growls growing louder as it tried to force its way through the narrow passage. "Keep moving," he shouted, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Don't stop." They crawled forward, their movements slow and labored. The tunnel seemed to go on forever, the walls closing in tighter with every passing second. Daniel's chest tightened, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He could feel the weight of the earth above him, pressing down, threatening to crush him. Then, suddenly, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The air was cooler here, the walls smooth and unmarked. In the center of the chamber was a pool of water, its surface still and dark. Above it, a shaft of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the water like a beacon. Elise let out a sob of relief. "It's a way out! We can swim up!" Nathan hesitated, his eyes darting around the chamber. "What if it's a trap? What if the creature's waiting for us?" Daniel shook his head. "We don't have a choice, we can't go back." They approached the pool, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The water was clear, its depths seemingly endless. Daniel took a deep breath, steeling himself for the final push. He turned to Elise and Nathan, his voice firm. "We go together. Stay close and don't stop until we reach the surface." They nodded, their faces pale but determined. Together they stepped into the pool, the cold water enveloping them like a shroud. The light above grew brighter as they swam upward, their movements slow and deliberate. Daniel could feel the pressure in his ears building, his lungs burning for air. Then, just as they reached the surface, something grabbed his leg. He looked down, his heart stopping as he saw the creature's pale hand wrapped around his ankle. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, its grin wider than ever. Daniel kicked out, his movements frantic, but the creature's grip was unbreakable. Elise and Nathan surfaced, gasping for air. They turned, their eyes widening in horror as they saw Daniel struggling against the creature's grasp. "Daniel!" Elise screamed, reaching for him. "Go!" he shouted, his voice strained. "Get out of here!" Nathan hesitated, his eyes darting between Daniel and the surface. "We can't leave you. You have to!" Daniel's voice was desperate. "Go!" Elise grabbed Nathan's arm, pulling him toward the surface. "We'll come back for you, I promise." Daniel watched as they disappeared into the night, his heart heavy with fear and regret. The creature's grip tightened, pulling him back into the darkness. He fought with everything he had, but it was no use. The creature was too strong. As he was dragged deeper into the abyss, Daniel's mind filled with visions of the chamber, the symbols, the creature's unblinking eyes. He realized, too late, that they had awakened something ancient, something that should have remained buried. The light above faded, replaced by an endless void. The creature's laughter echoed in his ears, a sound that would haunt him for the rest of his life, however short that might be. And then, there was nothing. Elise and Nathan burst through the surface, gasping for air. The sun was high in the sky, its light blinding after the darkness of the sinkhole. They scrambled onto the shore, their bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. Elise turned back to the water, her eyes scanning the surface for any sign of Daniel. But the water was still, its depths hiding the horrors they had just escaped. "We have to go back for him," she whispered, her voice breaking. Nathan shook his head, his face pale. "We can't. You saw what was down there. We'll never make it." Elise's hands clenched into fists, tears streaming down her face. "We can't just leave him." "We don't have a choice," Nathan said, his voice hollow. "He's gone." They sat in silence, the weight of their loss pressing down on them. The sinkhole loomed behind them, its dark waters hiding secrets that should have remained buried. They had ventured into the unknown, seeking adventure and discovery, But they had found something far worse. As they walked away, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ground. The sinkhole remained still, its surface undisturbed. But deep below, in the darkness, something stirred, and it was waiting.